My name is Nathan, and I was married to Emily for 8 years before our relationship crumbled in a way I never imagined. The worst part is that it all unfolded in front of her friends, who she seemed more focused on pleasing than standing up for her own husband. Looking back as I write this, I can see the warning signs that built up to the moment I grabbed my suitcase and walked away. Emily and I met during our college years, and back then she was a different person. Warm, encouraging, and aligned with my vision for a shared future. But after we tied the knot and settled into a suburban home, she started spending time with a group of women from our neighborhood who transformed her completely. These women were married to men with far higher incomes than mine, and they filled their days with shopping sprees, upscale brunches, and chatter about their careers, luxury vacations, and designer purchases. Emily began measuring our life against theirs, acting as though she was ashamed of me and my work as a middle school teacher, despite once saying she admired my dedication to shaping young minds. The group consisted of Lauren, married to an attorney, Samantha, whose husband ran a chain of cafes, Olivia, whose spouse was a surgeon, and Claire, whose partner earned hefty profits selling high-end properties. Every Wednesday, they gathered at our house for what they dubbed their tea circle. But it was really a chance to gossip, flaunt their wealth, and subtly undermine each other's contentment. At first, Emily tried to keep me away from these gatherings, suggesting I stay late at school or handle chores when her friends visited. But I noticed a shift in her after they left. She'd grow distant, irritable, and drop hints about needing a larger home or a more lucrative career for me. When I asked what was bothering her, she'd brush it off and retreat to bed early. The first time I truly grasped what was happening was about 7 months ago when I came home early from work with a pounding headache. I stepped into our living room to find all 5 women gathered around our coffee table, their luxury handbags and tailored outfits on full display, discussing their husbands' earnings and the cars they drove. Emily's face flushed when she saw me, and she introduced me to her friends, though I'd already met most at community events. Lauren gave me a curt glance and a greeting that suggested I was intruding, while Samantha barely acknowledged me with a nod. I greeted them politely and headed to the kitchen for water to ease my headache, but I overheard their hushed voices. I caught Emily mentioning that I'd had a tough day at work. As I passed back through the living room to head upstairs, Olivia remarked that it must be nice to have summers free as a teacher, her tone implying my job was cushy or unimportant. I wanted to clarify that teachers spend summers preparing lessons, attending training, or working side jobs to supplement income, but Emily quickly steered the conversation to a new bistro Samantha's husband had acquired. I went upstairs, took some painkillers, and tried to rest, but my mind replayed how those women had sized me up and how Emily seemed mortified by my presence. After that day, things deteriorated. Emily began inviting her friends over more frequently, no longer timing their visits for when I'd be out. It felt like she wanted me there, as if to highlight how her friends' husbands outshone me, and she seemed to relish their dismissive attitudes toward me when I crossed my own living room. Their remarks started subtly, but grew sharper. Lauren would quip that teachers probably didn't grasp finance or entrepreneurship, while Samantha would gush about her husband's lavish gifts and then glance at Emily's modest engagement ring, which we'd chosen because it was all we could afford. Olivia would mention her husband's grueling hours to support their family, implying I wasn't pulling my weight, and Claire would rave about their extravagant trips, stressing the importance of indulging in life's luxuries. Emily never stood up for me during these exchanges, and at times, she'd chime in, suggesting we should aim higher or lamenting that she wished we could afford more. She'd talk about how her friends' husbands were so accomplished and motivated, casting longing looks at our home, which was comfortable, but not as grand as theirs. The worst was that these women made their jabs in my presence, as if I were invisible or my feelings were irrelevant. They'd boast about their husbands' raises and bonuses while eyeing me like I was a letdown, and Emily would nod as if she agreed. I tried addressing how her friends made me feel like an outsider in my own home, but she'd get defensive, accusing me of being overly sensitive or misunderstanding how women bond. She claimed they were just sharing their lives and I shouldn't take it personally, but I saw the knowing glances they exchanged when they made their digs. The breaking point came one afternoon in April. I'd left school early after a half day for parent-teacher meetings and found the tea circle in full swing. They were discussing a high society fundraiser they were attending with their husbands, raving about their designer gowns and the hefty donations their spouses were making to impress the crowd. I said hello and went to the kitchen for a snack, having skipped lunch, but I overheard them talking about me. Lauren was saying it was a shame not everyone could afford such events, and Samantha chuckled, noting that some people had different life goals. As I walked back through with my sandwich, Olivia commented that it must be nice to live so simply, free from the pressures of a demanding career. Her smile was sharp, and Claire agreed, saying some people were suited for less ambitious roles. My cheeks burned, and I wanted to respond, but before I could, Emily laughed and said she sometimes wondered what it'd be like to be married to someone with bigger dreams. She said it lightly, but the room knew she meant it, and her friends exchanged smug looks. Lauren then said, Emily was such a brilliant, attractive woman who could have had her pick of partners, and she asked if Emily ever thought about how her life might have been different with other choices. The room fell silent, all eyes on Emily, while I stood there, sandwich in hand, wishing I could vanish. Emily glanced at me, then back at her friends, and said she tried not to dwell on hypotheticals since it wasn't fair to compare, but admitted she sometimes wondered what life with someone who could offer more possibilities would be like. She said she loved me but felt we were constrained in what we could achieve together, and her friends nodded sympathetically. Samantha added that women needed partners who matched their drive and elegance, and that some people were naturally more goal-oriented. Olivia remarked that it's tough to grow when tethered to someone satisfied with average, and Claire said life was too brief to accept less than what you truly desired. I stood there as my wife and her friends painted me as a burden, and something inside me shattered. Emily met my eyes, and I saw she believed every word she'd said, likely harboring these thoughts for months. I placed my sandwich on the table and said I had errands to run, leaving without a farewell. I drove aimlessly for hours, reflecting on when Emily stopped valuing me and started seeing me as an embarrassment. When I returned home, her friends were gone, and Emily was cooking dinner as if nothing had happened. I asked to talk, and she agreed. I told her I'd heard her comments about imagining life with someone else and feeling limited by me. Emily immediately got defensive, claiming I'd misunderstood and that she was just chatting with her friends. She said women often discuss hypotheticals and it wasn't serious, but her refusal to meet my gaze told me she knew she'd gone too far. I explained it wasn't just that day. It was months of her letting her friends belittle me and my career, never once defending me. I said it felt like she was ashamed of me, wishing I were more like Lauren's or Samantha's husbands, who could shower her with luxuries. Emily teared up, denying it, but then admitted she sometimes felt frustrated we couldn't keep up with her friends' lifestyles. She said she felt excluded when they discussed their trips and purchases, wishing we had the means to join in. I acknowledged her desire for nice things, but said her approach was tearing our marriage apart. I told her friends were exploiting her insecurities to boost their own egos, and she was letting them turn her against me instead of discussing her concerns with me. Emily countered that her friends were accomplished women who understood the value of high expectations, and maybe I should be more driven to improve our circumstances instead of settling for teaching. That conversation stretched late, growing heated as we hurled hurtful words. Emily kept defending her friends, insisting they were pushing her to demand more from life, while I argued they were encouraging her to devalue me. The next few weeks were strained as we tried to act normal, but I felt Emily drifting further away. She spent more time with her friends, returning with tales of their husbands' latest successes, always framed to highlight our shortcomings. The tea circle continued, and I began staying late at school or hitting the gym to avoid them, though sometimes I'd come home mid-meeting and overhear their remarks about my stress or fatigue, suggesting Emily needed to inspire me to aim higher. One evening in May, I found Emily at our kitchen table with brochures for luxury homes, cars, and exotic vacations, courtesy of Claire. She wanted to discuss upgrading our lifestyle. I skimmed the materials, seeing costs far beyond my teacher's salary. Emily suggested I explore better-paying careers or take a second job so we could live like her friends. I told her I loved teaching, excelled at it, and didn't want to abandon a meaningful career just to impress her clique. I pointed out that if she wanted more income, She could work too, instead of spending her days shopping and gossiping with women who thrived on others' insecurities. Emily snapped that her friends' husbands earned enough so their wives didn't need jobs, and it wasn't fair for me to expect her to work when I couldn't provide a successful lifestyle. She said perhaps the issue was my lack of ambition, not her unrealistic demands. That argument raged until midnight, each of us saying things meant to wound. Emily admitted she was tired of feeling humiliated when her friends boasted, having nothing comparable to share, and I confessed I was exhausted from feeling like a failure in my own home for not matching men with different careers. The next morning, we barely spoke, and I sensed Emily had reached a decision she wasn't ready to voice. That moment arrived the following Wednesday when I came home early. Shaken after a student's injury canceled my afternoon classes. The tea circle was in session, and they fell silent when I entered, clearly discussing something heavy. I greeted them and started upstairs, but Lauren called me back, saying they needed to address something. Her tone warned me it wouldn't be pleasant, but I returned to the living room standing by the door. Lauren said they'd been discussing Emily's well-being and were worried about her joy. She called Emily a phenomenal woman who deserved a partner equal to her vision and potential, suggesting she was being held back. Samantha noted Emily's recent sadness, implying our marriage was stifling her. She said Emily was too kind to admit it, but that her struggles were obvious. Lauren added that they'd been urging Emily to reflect on her life's desires, and perhaps it was time to evaluate if she was with the right person for her ambitions. They suggested that people sometimes diverge, and it was for Emily to face when a relationship wasn't working. I looked at Emily, sitting silently on the sofa, staring at her hands, not once defending me or telling her friends they'd overstepped by confronting me in our home. I waited for her to intervene, but she stayed quiet as they declared I wasn't enough for her. Finally, I asked Emily if she shared their views and agreed with their assessment of our marriage. She met my eyes and said she wasn't sure how to respond, but she'd been questioning whether we wanted the same things. Lauren said Emily had confided in them about feeling suffocated in a marriage that wasn't allowing her to grow. She claimed Emily was too gentle to hurt me outright, but had admitted she sometimes felt she'd settled for less by marrying me. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me and asked Emily if she'd truly said those things. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted she'd shared frustrations in moments of confusion, but her emotions were tangled, and she didn't know how to untangle them. Samantha then declared that Emily deserved someone on her level, and it wasn't fair for either of us to stay in a marriage where one felt they'd compromised. She said Emily was a refined woman with boundless potential, needing a partner who could stimulate her growth, not someone content with simplicity. That phrase, on her level, stung like a slap, and I realized this was the climax of months of their subtle digs and attacks. Emily's friends had persuaded her she was too good for me, convincing her I was an obstacle to the life she deserved better. I asked Emily point blank if she thought I was beneath her. The room went still, everyone waiting. She struggled to respond, then said she didn't see it as levels, but felt we were sometimes in different life stages and might want different futures. She said her friends had shown her, see, it was okay to crave more, and perhaps we'd evolved in ways that made us less suited. Lauren nodded and said it was no one's fault when paths diverged, but honesty was essential when a marriage had reached its end. She suggested Emily could start anew with someone who could offer the life she craved, and that I deserved someone who valued me as I was, not wished I were different. I stood there as these women dissected my marriage like a failed experiment, and I knew Emily had made her choice. She'd prioritized her friends' opinions over our bond, letting them convince her I was holding her back. I said I'd heard enough, refusing to stand in my own living room while strangers told me I wasn't worthy of my wife. I told them that if Emily felt she'd settled for less, we needed to discuss what that meant for us. Emily's friends exchanged satisfied looks, as if they'd accomplished their goal. She said that sometimes truth hurt, but facing it was better than living a lie. I looked at Emily one last time and asked if she wanted me to leave so she could keep discussing our marriage with her clique, or if she wanted them to leave so we could talk privately. Emily wavered between me and her friends, then said perhaps I should give her time to reflect. That moment confirmed our marriage was done. She'd chosen to prioritize her friends over us. I went upstairs, packed a bag with a few days' clothes, and heard their hushed voices downstairs. When I came back down, Emily stood in the hallway looking distressed and uncertain. I told her I'd stay at my brother's place to give her the space she wanted, and we could talk when she was ready to decide what's next. She started to speak, but I stopped her, saying I didn't want to hear more about how I fell short or trapped her. I passed the living room where her friends sat, still watching me like spectators at a show. Lauren called out and said she hoped I understood they were just trying to help, and I turned and told her ruining a marriage wasn't help anyone. I said they'd spent months coming into my home, making me feel inadequate and unwelcome, turning my wife against me by convincing her she deserved better than what we'd created together. I told them they thrived on making others feel inferior, and I pitied their husbands who lived with women perpetually discontented. Claire tried to respond, but I was already at the door, saying they'd gotten their wish and could congratulate themselves for destroying a marriage. I hoped Emily's new life with someone worthy would ease their own insecurities. I drove to my brother Caleb's place and spent 3 days grappling with what had happened, trying to pinpoint my next steps. Caleb was livid when I shared everything, calling Emily's friends poisonous people who fed on drama. He'd noticed Emily's shift at family events, how she seemed to disdain our simple lifestyle compared to her friends. He said a true partner would have defended me, and Emily's silence revealed her true colors. I called Emily multiple times over those days, but she didn't pick up. When I finally got through, she said she still needed time and wasn't ready to talk. I asked if her friends were still advising her about our marriage, and she bristled, saying she needed support from people who cared about her joy. That call cemented that Emily wasn't going to fight for us or set boundaries with her friends, letting them shape her choices. Over the next week, I reflected on our 8 years together, recalling the woman I'd fallen for in college who championed my teaching aspirations, wondering when she'd started seeing my career as a source of shame. But each time I considered reconciliation, I pictured her sitting mute while her friends deemed me unworthy, and her asking me to leave instead of them. The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't share a future with. I met with a divorce attorney recommended by a coworker, spending hours recounting the past months. She said it sounded like emotional abuse, with Emily's friends systematically eroding my confidence and marriage. Since we had no kids or major assets, she said filing for divorce would be simple, and Emily's behavior suggested she might not fight it. I signed the papers, and they were served to Emily days later. When Emily got the papers, she called, distraught, asking why I hadn't tried harder to fix things. I said she'd made her stance clear by airing our issues with her friends and agreeing I wasn't enough. She claimed she hadn't meant for it to go this far, just that she was confused, but I said the damage was irreversible. I couldn't stay with someone who saw me as a compromise, or in a home where her friends belittled me. She suggested counseling, but I explained our issues went beyond communication. She'd lost respect for me, letting her friends convince her our life wasn't enough. Emily said her friends were just helping her understand her unhappiness, and perhaps they'd given poor advice, but that didn't mean we had to end. I countered that true friends would have urged her to talk to me, not fantasize about a better life with someone else. I said her marriage couldn't survive when she let outsiders demean her spouse, and I deserved better. The divorce took 9 months, as we split assets and decided on the house. Emily bought my share with a loan from her family, and I used my portion for a down payment on a condo near school. We had minimal contact except through lawyers, but mutual friends said Emily still leaned on her T-circle who seemed to celebrate her freedom. Some heard Lauren say Emily was better off without someone who couldn't match her worth, and Samantha predicted she'd find a more suitable match soon. These remarks didn't shock me. They were her friends patting themselves on the back. In my new condo, I rebuilt my life, surprised by the peace I felt away from the constant judgment. I'd spent months tiptoeing, trying to prove my value to people who'd written me off, and now I could be myself. A year later, I ran into Olivia at a store, and she acted like we were buddies, saying she hoped I held no grudges. She was taken aback when I didn't play along. I told her I blamed her and her friends for dismantling my marriage, calling them toxic people who thrived on sowing discord. She insisted they'd only supported Emily's search for happiness, and it wasn't their fault our marriage faltered. I said our marriage had normal issues couples resolve together, but her group turned them into reasons for Emily to leave. I said their months of making me feel unworthy and unwanted and convincing Emily she'd settled were cruel. I told her true friends would have encouraged Emily to communicate with me, not dream of a different husband. She stormed off, annoyed, but I felt unburdened saying my piece. A year post-divorce, I learned Emily was dating a wealthy executive, and her friends were thrilled, believing he could give her the lifestyle they deemed she deserved. It hurt, but I smiled, hearing her boyfriend disliked her friend's overreach, knowing Emily might face a choice between their approval and her relationship. I hoped she'd choose wiser this time. Her friends were right about one thing. We weren't a match. But they were mistaken about who was settling for less.